According to the DOJ indictment on Ray Bitar and Nelson Burtnick, as early as August 31st, 2010, there was discrepancies in reported total cash held by Full Tilt Poker and actual total cash held. According to, again, the indictment, CC, co-conspirator number 2, acted on direction from Ray Bitar, falsely claiming to the AGCC that FTP had $370 million in total cash held and $322 million in player deposits. However, an internal report prepared for CC2 and Bitar reflected a very different number. 122 million was reported, a full $200 million short of what was owed to players. Were you made aware of this report, or was anyone in the company, shareholder or board, made aware of this report in August 2010 other than Bitar and CC2?
No one was made aware of that report. I don't know anything about the report, so I'd be speculating. I do find it interesting. It's sad, it's not interesting. But in terms of investigating what happened and what led to April 15th, I have spent no energy trying to answer these particular questions about, like, was it August, was it October, was it earlier in the year in 2010? I'm not a professional investigator, and actually it's interesting, you read that statement, but then I just read this week the Alderney report, and they seem to think that the company was solvent in October of 2010, and they conducted their own investigation. So it's all a mystery to me in terms of the time, the actual timing. I know what hole was there in April, but I don't know when it happened. But what I can tell you is that at no time was there a report such as the one cited in this indictment ever shared with any owner of the company or the board.
There was, again, referring to the indictment, problems, again, stemming from processors stealing money. In November 2010, the indictment says that Bitar and Burtnick decided to go ahead and start crediting U.S. customers that were attempting to deposit immediately, even though Full Tilt had not at that time collected the funds from the players. This is a fairly sensitive subject to be collecting, essentially approving funds without having knowledge of whether you're going to be able to collect these deposits. Looking back, do you think that this is something that should have been decided on solely by Ray and Nelson, or do you think this is something?
So you say sensitive. I wouldn't agree with it being sensitive. I would agree with what you just said, which is that a decision to embark on allowing these transactions to go on for what must have been maybe months, and to rise into the 9-figure range, that absolutely should have been a board decision. And we were not brought into that decision process at all. So the backlog, the concept of the backlog, what's controversial about it and what is devastating about it is that it turned out to just sort of to put the company over the edge in terms of its cash coverage, right? So it's absolutely, the company had no right to be running a backlog, considering that it appears that it was underwater anyway, okay, number one. And from a corporate governance point of view and my own personal point of view, the fact that that decision was made without board approval is completely unacceptable.
There begins to be, public mention at this point. In November, starting November 19th, there was a thread on 2+2 mentioning deposit problems, with players mentioning that they had deposited money on the site and that the funds were not being collected. One specifically on a not 2+2, but another forum on January 29th. The player mentioned that as of January 29th, that a deposit from November of 2010 had yet to be collected. Were any of these kind of threads that were kind of going around, and there was a lot of chatter kind of about the deposit process? Were any of these brought to your or any of the shareholders and board of directors, attention? I mean, as you say, the backlog itself, could potentially not be a problem had there been funds on hand.
It wouldn't have been a problem as long as there are funds on hand.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying. Obviously, I'm upset that the backlog happened. And the poker community has a right to be upset that the backlog happened because it happened under unacceptable conditions for the backlog. Mm-hmm. Okay. In terms of sort of these anecdotes of people having trouble or where deposits aren't being collected, I was not really aware. I can tell you that from the earliest days of Full Tilt Poker, 2004 all the way till April, every once in a while, someone might come up to me at a poker tournament, or I might get an email saying, hey, I had this weird thing happen, I didn't get charged, or I tried to make a deposit and it didn't go through, or I made a withdrawal and the check bounced. That would happen sometimes. And that would be, and you'd hear about those things. Those are anecdotal stories. There are hundreds of thousands of people depositing every day. It just doesn't, you would hear about those things, and it was always, it seemed to be, it could be a glitch in the system, right? Someone's deposit is falling through the cracks of various process. I don't know, but I would have actually thought that there'd be more of a groundswell of posts, I guess, but I guess people were making deposits and weren't getting charged. I know well over 100,000 people, I believe, ended up benefiting from the backlog. Maybe 130,000 people ended up making deposits that didn't get charged to their accounts. So again, in hindsight, a couple of people said, hey, I haven't been charged. It just didn't, it didn't turn into a flood of that, for me anyway. Maybe I just out of touch.
In February 1st, specifically according to the DOJ's indictment against Bitar and Burtnick.
February 1st, okay.
Ray Bitar receives a projection from his financial staff warning him that Full Tilt Poker would run out of all cash within months. How is it possible that something as dire as this was not brought to the board's attention, to the shareholders' attention? Really, it doesn't seem like anyone from this team, the financial team, kind of stepped up and said anything at this point. And certainly Ray or Gil Coronado at this point need to be concerned about a projection that says they're going to run out of cash in months. Do you, now kind of putting the date February 1 together, can you recall Ray his mood being any bit peculiar at this time? Was there any knowledge, to you or anyone other than this kind of small group that's listed here, that there was a problem of this magnitude?
No. Ray's mood, he didn't let on that this was going on. You didn't ask me if I was given that report. Obviously I wasn't. And how is it possible? I don't know. Again, you're asking me to speculate. Clearly, things got out of hand, and people in Dublin were trying to clean up the mess, I guess, somehow, right? And not tell the board or the members.
If they were trying to clean up the mess, or if Ray was trying to clean up this mess at this point, How can it be possible that distributions were still being authorized at this time?
It's horrible. It's horrible. Again, if the board had any inkling that there was this kind of hole in our balance sheet, there would have never been even we would have responded in the same way that we tried to respond after April 15th. I mean, there would have been no distributions. It wouldn't have even been the discussion. The whole discussion would have shifted toward, we need to find an investor and we need to try and fix this problem. If we had been informed in February or January or December. It's just, those distributions would not have happened. Of course, I think it's pretty clear why the distributions continued.
At what stage here now? We're getting close to April 15th here now. At any point before April 15th, were you made aware of the company's financial situation, the backlog, or any of these kind of pending problems that lead to the company's demise, post April 15?
Yes. Financial problems, no. I was never shown a balance sheet or any kind of a financial document that would have suggested that we were in a severe state of financial distress before April 15th. But on April 7th, I was in Dublin. It was, I think, my second or third trip to Dublin since 2008. There was a board meeting there. And the reason I was in Dublin for that board meeting, it was, at that time, it was convenient for me because I was headed off to a USO poker tour. And I was due to leave on the morning of the 8th. Not sure when I arrived in Dublin. I think maybe the 5th or the 6th. Okay. We had those meetings, and on the night of the 7th, I was at Ray's house, and he told me that there was a 9-figure backlog. I think the number he gave me at that time was, I'm not sure, I don't want to speculate. It was big, it was over 100 million.
What are your reactions when he tells you this?
I was shocked and upset. And Chris was in the house at the time, and I called Chris over. And I said, kind of to Ray, like, can you tell me what you just told, can you tell Chris what you just told me?
Was he uncomfortable talking about this? Was Ray, did Ray know at this point, like, hey, this is something that I've almost been kind of keeping from you guys that you need to know about now?
It felt like that to me. I don't know.
What was Chris's response?
Chris was not happy. The information was given to us not in the context of the company is in terrible financial distress now. It was just, hey, there have been these deposits that we have credited to customers and we have been unable to collect. It was also, we were told that the number had been higher and was coming down, which meant that the current capacity of the company to handle processing actually outstripped the demand for the deposits, I guess, so that the backlog was being cleared. Again, looking back on it, I knew, I just didn't understand what it was. Mm-hmm. I try and put myself back in my April 7th self and getting the news. And I was upset about the fact that this thing had happened without board approval or without Ray telling me. It didn't kick in like, oh, this could be a serious financial problem yet. I hadn't thought about it. I didn't really understand what the backlog was. And what I mean by that is, for you to really understand the backlog, you have to understand, you have to know how quickly do you plan on, or does it project in terms of that it could get cleared? How likely is it that it's going to get cleared? But also, more importantly, the question I would have asked in that cash coverage report would have been, what impact has the backlog had on the cash coverage? And that's not an easy question to answer.
Did you bring up the question to Ray at that point in terms of what effect does this have on the cash coverage on April 7th?
I don't know that I asked that specific question right then. I was kind of shocked. But I just didn't, I had no time to wrap my head around it. I had to fly to the Middle East in the morning. This is literally hours before I'm going to leave. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't cancel that trip. Mm-hmm. But I knew that the news that Ray had given me was important. And I told him that I'd be back in Dublin after my USO trip, and then there was actually, I had to film it was Poker Lounge or something. So I think I was going to be back in Dublin on the 19th, 12 days later. Again, I have no idea of what's behind the backlog. Mm-hmm. in terms of that there's another big hole there. And I was just told that the backlog was getting smaller. So it didn't seem like an emergency. Mm-hmm. It was just bad. And so I was going to have to investigate further.
Did the fact, though, that Ray kept this information from the board, surely this is a fairly significant infraction or
yeah.
offense.
Yes.
Was there a discussion between you and Chris, that evening without Ray, or did you bring this to the attention of the board about, having Ray removed as CEO of Full Tilt Poker?
I don't know that Chris and I spoke privately that night. I really don't know. I don't remember. I don't think that there was any point in having a board meeting at that right then. You've just gotten news that potentially is very big and devastating news. You have to understand it first. And you don't just go, oh, you didn't tell me about that, you're fired. Like right at that moment. That's just absurd, right? I was coming back to Dublin on the 19th, and I would have gotten to the bottom of the backlog. That I know. I would have understood it. Being in Dublin, I think that I would have started pulling up that cash coverage. I mean, I would have wanted to understand it in terms of cash coverage. And I believe that I would have found out about all the problems. And obviously, I don't think that Ray would have continued on as the CEO of the company. But again, I'm speculating. I don't know.
Can you explain now to kind of the folks watching in its simplest form what the backlog actually meant to the overall financial health or network health?
Yeah, actually, it's less than obvious. If you just say, okay, the backlog's 100 million, what does that mean to the cash coverage? You don't know. You can't just answer that question without doing a lot of investigating. Mm-hmm. That was one of the problems I had on the 7th. I'm going to be on a plane in 5 hours. And I'll just give you a very simple example. Let's say that there's an online poker company has no backlog, and now today they allow you to deposit $100 and they allow me to deposit $100 on the site, and they don't happen to have the ability to process those two payments. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the answer to the question is, how big is the backlog? Is $200. The answer to the question at that moment of what kind of impact does that $200 in backlog have on the cash coverage of the company The answer to that is zero. You have $100 in your account, I have $100 in my account. And at that moment, if you were to then turn around and try and withdraw your $100, the company would inform you, well, we didn't collect that 100 over here, so you're actually even. And the same thing would happen to me if I tried to withdraw. So that 200, so the backlog's 200, effect on the cash coverage is zero. Now let's just say we play a heads up, sit and go. And let's say you win. Now you have 200 in your account, I have zero in my account. Now the answer to the question, how much has the backlog now affected our cash coverage, it's now changed by 100. Right? If you were to try and withdraw your 200, you'd be told, well, you still owe the company 100 from that uncollected deposit. Here's 100 and now we're even. And I don't have any money to withdraw. So now it's cost us, or costs the company, I guess full tilt in this case with this backlog, $100, right? So now that's a very simple example of just two people. The complexity of trying to figure out the effect on the cash coverage for a backlog that I believe there were 130,000 people that were involved is not a trivial matter. And I knew there was no way on April 7th that I could understand it.
April 15th, 2011. I don't think I need to say much more about that date and the relevance and what transpired. Talk to me about your first reaction, where you were, how you found out.
Well, I just found out via email. I was in Dubai, so it was late at night. I was at some restaurant with Huckseed, actually. We're just enjoying some food and hanging out. It was obviously a shock. And sort of initially, people had heard that there were indictments, but no one knew who. So we really didn't know much for about maybe half an hour or so.
Were you kind of in a panic mode at this point in terms of trying to get in touch with the office in Dublin, the board, to understand what had happened a little bit more in depth?
Well, we didn't really even understand who was indicted yet, so there was a little bit of time there. I definitely headed back to the hotel room and waited for more information. And then once we saw the indictments, there was some sort of, I think it was a board call, or at very least there was, a group of top management, and I got on that phone. I got on that phone call as well. And there was another big technical, plus the company needs to figure out an effective way to geo-block all the US players. So there were a lot of decisions that needed to be made very quickly that had nothing to do with whether Ray is going to stay on as the CEO. Of course, with any, at some point during that evening, probably after the call, I'm thinking about things like that, for sure. And I thought that there was going to be potentially a painful transition for the company.
At this point, just days prior, you're learning about, $130 or $115 million backlog. Are you starting to kind of piece together any part of? Are you looking at this knowledge that you have, a few days prior, and kind of looking at the shutdown on April 15th and saying, okay, these two incidents here, we could have a more serious problem on our hands now that this backlog might not be resolved as quickly as we anticipated?
No, it's just too much going on. I don't even know I don't know when the backlog entered back into my mind. The news of the indictment just there's nothing left in your brain to think about. I'm just not connecting anything yet, right? That's just going to take time. I have to come to Dublin and start connecting dots to start figuring out the impact. You know, right now you're just asking questions like, okay, in the indictment there are these bank accounts listed. How much money is in those bank accounts? You're just trying to get very simple, primitive answers to questions. You just, you don't want to panic, and you don't want to jump to any conclusions, and you're just trying to think clearly. It's not easy to do. And you're just trying to get answers to the most simple questions at that point.
What were the discussions amongst the board in the early portions, or the kind of hours after April 15th, and in terms of communicating with the Full Tilt customers?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was the board. I think Chris was on that call. Rafe may have been on that call. It might have just been me and Ray in terms of board members on that first call that discussed it. But again, I just don't know, so I'm speculating. I just can't remember who was exactly on that call. I do know that general counsel for the company was on that call, CFO was on the call, PR was on that call. And there must have been actually some more company lawyers, but I'm not sure. Again, I just don't know. I know that the purpose of that press release was very simple. It was to acknowledge that the indictments had happened, and to inform our customers that we were going to cease operations in the United States. And I know at the end of that statement, I believe there was some reference to the fact that everyone's money was safe and secure. That was clearly inaccurate. I can tell you that I was one of many people on that call. The CFO was on that call. And I had no idea on April 15th that that was not a true statement. And I'm very disappointed that I think some people that should have known that it was not a true statement allowed it to be made.